Intro. It's a Wonderful Life is a good movie that shows that someone can have success and failure in life, but there is always a better view to look at life from. It's a Christmas movie, but also it has a meaning that doesn't really matter what holiday you're viewing it from. It's a fun movie. It's a good way of showing that way of life, the way that life can be valued at, and is a fun watch. But also, since it's a holiday movie, it's fun for the season. It's a fun seasonal movie, usually. Has some Christmas elements to it as well. So, if you're ever feeling jolly, if you're jolly maxing, you could always watch the movie. But first, we need to know the story of the film. We start off the movie when we see an angel looking over George as he contemplates jumping off a bridge on Christmas Eve. Luckily, though, Clarence, the guardian angel, is looking after him and has to earn his wings. So, he starts to look at George's life to see what good he's done. He starts with how he saved his brother from drowning, but we also see the time George saved someone from being poisoned. So, add that to the gold star of medals. Now, fast forward to when George is about to go to college. He's about to go on his Eras tour, but then his dad dies of a stroke. What a shame, actually. He's also introduced to Mary, who will become his future wife. But what will happen to George's father's business? Simple. It would be shut down unless George is the one running it. So that's what he does. And he kind of makes his whole life as he sees his younger brother, Harry, be more happy than him after college. George skips his honeymoon with Mary so that the company can stay afloat after a bank run. This is also where they make Bailey Park, which is like the park that the company owns. It's like private park industries. But right before Harry gets his Medal of Honor for the Navy and stopping an attack, Billy, who is George's uncle, accidentally misplaces $8,000 in 1930s money. So that's like $1 million today. And has it land in George's enemy, Porter's, hands. Not good. You don't want it there. George rightfully crashes out after this and says he regrets making all the decisions he made for the family, and then runs away to the bridge where we saw him at the start of the movie. But before he jumps, Clarence comes down into the river and talks to George. George pulls the classic, "I wish I was never born" mantra, and then Clarence snaps his fingers and basically says, "Okay, Buckster." In a world where George isn't born, it's shown that he doesn't save his brother in the lake. Sucks to suck. But also the town is called Pottersville because Potter owns most of it. Nobody cares for each other. And everyone just lives for the dopamine and entertainment. But his mother doesn't know him. And Uncle Billy was put in a mental hospital. Mary's a librarian who never married and also doesn't know George. He then runs back to Clarence and asks him to return his life back to normal, and Clarence agrees. Then George and Mary get enough people from the townspeople, and they get enough money, and they get enough money to pay off the loans. George then finds a note that says, "Remember, no man is a failure who has friends," in the book of Tom Sawyer. Wow, that's literature for you. But then a bell rings, and when a bell rings, an angel gets its wings. So, Clarence got his wings, and George is happier than ever. And that's the story. So roll the credits. The movie's over. There's no post-credit scene in this one. As we see throughout the movie, George has shown to have important through the people around him and their lives. From saving his brother to building all the houses that people live in, it's a way that we get to see that there's an impact that George had in the movie. And it's a good way to show that his life had meaning to other people throughout the movie. But it's not rocket science to say that's what the movie did, was the idea of having George not be born. That's the point of it. But it's really unique at how it did it. There could have been a lot of ways that Clarence could have persuaded George that his life was like worth it and not jump. Of course, since he's a guardian angel, he also kind of has more options than the average person, because he can do stuff we can't. But instead, he decides to show George not what the future would look like, but what the present would look like. Probably because the future is always seen as this elusive thing, and so looking at it wouldn't help too much, because a lot of people live in the current moment. It's just what happens to a lot of people, so sometimes it's needed to show the now instead of the when. And also, it's a good way at least in writing, to show that George's life had an impact on all the people that he encountered in his life. Because we got to see all those actions happen in real time. We see George save his brother from dying, but when we see no George, none at all, we see the aftermath of what happens if he wasn't there. It's an interesting thing that deals with alternate timelines and stuff like that, but more scaled down in a way. But it's also good to see that George's life is not full of just success. That would kind of make him unlikable. You can't have a character who doesn't have any flaws being perfect, because being perfect is a flaw, but also because then it doesn't make them feel human. In all the successes and good things George does, throughout his life, there's also the shortcomings or the mistakes he makes. For example, it's not really his fault, but George lives a life that he isn't happy living compared to his brother Harry's life. He sees his life as boring, as corporate, as everything the typical 9 to 5, because he decided to settle down and focus on the business instead of getting out there and focusing on being social and being all those other things you would be, and whatever you would typically do in your 20s. It's seen as more boring and meh, honestly. And he doesn't really choose this lifestyle. He was kind of forced into it because of how he had no choice whatsoever in his life but to take over the company after his dad died. Make the bank, I guess, but at what cost? He chose that, but what was also mainly forced into a position that would put him in that boring lifestyle. But it's also for the greater good, too, because of what his dad's business did. It was a business that helped people out, and eventually, under George, would build the houses which people would live in, and would definitely help a lot of people out, because living somewhere is something we all need to do. That's a given. That's a right. But sometimes the greater good requires some sacrifice, whether that be personal sacrifice or external sacrifices like extra labor or whatnot. But it also begs the question of how much sacrifice would somebody be willing to give up for the greater good? Like George did give up his entire free future, but he did also help a good amount of people. That's what the alternate timeline that Clarence shows to him really is about. All that help that he gave out wasn't taken for granted. But to him, he had to give up all of this stuff just in order to get to this position. He had a lot of potential in life and a lot of plans, but he kind of got bogged down by focusing on the job and on the business and on that. In his mind, this is a failure, even though for a lot of people it would be a success. A lot of people want to run a business, be the top person of the ladder, the corporate ladder. You're not falling, but the ladder is different for everyone because when you climb all the way to the top, it feels like hard work. You did everything right, and they promoted you, and where you got. But for some other people, these are like chip crumbs. They're like E.T. and they're just following the Reese's Pieces on the floor. They're just handed it sometimes. Like George in the movie, for example. I mean, it was a family business, so by genetics, he got lucky. But in terms of hard work and those serotonin levels, he's kind of a Nepo baby in that way, in somewhat. You're not working hard for it in some way, you're just kind of given it because of luck. And so you often feel disappointed. Kind of the idea, like prostitution in a way, a big stretch, but kind of in that way. Like, but since George got this, it didn't feel like a win. Like, if you didn't work towards it, it doesn't feel good. That's what the main idea is. It's a luxury that was taken for granted, something that was expected, and when given, wasn't that really surprising. So it doesn't feel like it was worked towards the same way it would have if you were promoted there. Same crap, different toilet. You got there, but is it really something you earned? That's why George probably doesn't like his life and sees Harry's life as happier. That, and also because Harry did everything in a half, not gonna lie. If we're gonna be honest, Harry also is a Nepo baby. But he's more of a Nepo baby of the two because it was also assumed that he would take over the company one day. You know, that's also not motivating that much if we're gonna keep it 100p. But besides that, George also felt like Harry lived a life that helped more people, and like, because you could see that, because it's also in the way that Harry's life is shown, that help is visible. It's shown in the movie. George's help is in the form that he doesn't see. He did help a lot of people, but really doesn't see it. It doesn't count for him in that scenario. It doesn't count in his mind. But the way Harry helped people by saving them made him get a medal in a ceremony and all that. That's the big stuff right there. Really big stuff happening for Harry, so invest in Harry stocks. But since you can see that success, you are more likely to be like, well, that's better than mine, which simply isn't true. As long as you're not hating online, like, success shouldn't be undermined just because it's not in front of you. Success is mainly equal to anyone as long as it's helping someone. And in the end, was the people getting the houses. That's like, it's a change. That's a change. Seen but unseen by George, in a way. This is also because in the movie, it becomes Pottersville. The town got taken over by the oligarchs and the rich businessmen. Everything is worse off because everything's owned by one person, and it's not a city anymore. It's a monopoly. It's the Monopoly board. You just got Baltic Avenue in a city. The people of the town didn't have a kind soul to give them a house or a place to live, and instead got good old money bagging. It's the seen fact that George did give these people an opportunity to live in affordable housing and actually survive. But it's the unseen because sometimes you just don't see every person's happiness to something like this. Some people are just never seen by other people. That's life. That's just how it is. Of course, the people are happy to be able to live in this area. It's just that you don't visibly see it. And you don't see that yourself. And usually when we look for how things are responded to, we look for those positive things we can see. For example, if you were to sell something on eBay as a service and you wanted feedback or anything from your customers, you would look at the reviews of the products. You would look and see all the 5-star reviews, but also you would also see all the 1-star reviews. You were seeing that in real time, and it's something your eyes are just looking at. You see it, and you're like, well, shucks, I guess I did a good job. Or you're like, oh my god, I can't believe I did such a bad job, depending on what you got in your reviews. And that's how you see it. You improve and all of that. But then if you're a contractor and developer, you really only see the development process of the house, really. Maybe, like probably. But maybe just maybe, you see someone who lives there passing by, but they don't know you if you're a regular contractor, and it's hard for you to actually know them, because you're just a contractor. Like, that's, I don't know, people usually don't know their contractors. But back to George and his building. Since his family is also known, he might see a few people, but he may not know them. Because you have a monopoly. Pottersville is like actually the monopoly, like the board, like the video game version. Like George's version is like you own Baltic Avenue, but you don't do it. Like you don't make everything bland. You own Baltic Avenue over here. Property is property. And these people are the ones that live on Baltic Avenue, this unique Baltic Avenue. Usually in life, you won't see them, but they are the backbone of keeping money flowing. So again, it's like the owning business part where it's just given to you, so it's less meaningful than if you actually worked towards it. But it shows that sometimes happiness is something that isn't seen as much, which is why George is so affected by the alternate timeline, because of the stark contrast between what happens when the invisible happiness is gone. It makes the city gray, it makes it bleak, it makes it blah, it makes it like SpongeBob Krabby Patty goop in that one episode. Because even if you don't see the happiness, it's still there. It's like air. You breathe air. You go in and out and in and out. It goes into you so you can stay alive. That's the same as the happiness, as obviously George doesn't see it. But it's still there, still giving people the ability to live. Take oxygen away and replace it with nitrous oxide, and bam, everyone is either dead, I choke you out, you're not breathing type dead. Happiness is gone, and that's the real effect of it. So really, the message of like this is simpler. That sometimes, not all the time, that failure can be seen as a hidden success. In a way, it depends on your framing of it, really. But that's really the overall message. When you listen to the music of the movie, it sounds like old music that you would hear in these old movies. Fork, Fan, and Kitchen statement, I know. But if you've ever heard any of the songs from these really old movies, you just know. You just know the sound I'm talking about. The strings and probably live performance that make it give a more authentic feel. It sounds less movie-like and more song-like, if that makes sense. But also, it feels more season-based. Like, so when you hear the music, it feels a lot more jolly and a lot more happy. It's jolly maxing and just going into Christmas core, really, was the jolliness. For example, some of the tracks have bells in the background. Usually only used if you want to have this really cool thing known as atmosphere in your song. It's snowing, it's all white outside, and it's a December miracle. Holiday season appears, and if you do Christmas, then you probably have bells on your Christmas tree. The bells are ringing in this thing called symbolic and symbolism. The bells in track are also our angels getting wings, technically. But it's made to fit that mood because in 1940s America, that's what everyone did. That's what everyone did back in the day. Back then, everyone was a Christian. People are still Christian, but it's weird. Same poop, different toilet situation. But it's a good soundtrack for the film because it actually sets the mood and all of that. And also can kind of show you the time period this movie takes place in. So it does that well, but since the movie has a good soundtrack, it might have good reviews. On IMDb, it has a 8.6 out of 10, which puts it at the 21st highest rated movie spot on the website. But It also has a 94% on Rotten Tomatoes and an 89% on Metacritic. How amazing! But on Letterboxd, it has a 4.4 out of 5, so basically an 8.8 out of 10, which puts it at number 53 on their top 250 list. So overall, good reviews all around. So, like, I guess this one is a classic holiday time movie that did well with critics, surprisingly, because that never happens. Overall, It's a Wonderful Life is a good movie that shows the different ways that success finds itself in life. It's also a fun holiday themed movie, so it's probably best enjoyed around that holiday period, but it's enjoyable any time of the year. I personally would give the movie a 9.7 out of 10. So in between Fight Club and Interstellar on the list so far. If you have any thoughts on the movie, you could comment them down below if you want to. But overall, that's about it. If you want to, please like and subscribe. Pretty please.